Thank you. Thank you for having me. Make sure that's still working. Yep. All right. So, despite the name up there, my name is Herb McDerp. Not really. Morgan Allen. I've been programming for a really long time. Done a lot of front-end work. The entirety of my career, I did a bunch of startup-y stuff in the late 90s. I got unhappy with it all in 2001 and decided laying bricks was in my better interest. Then after moving to the Bay Area in 2006, failed career in brewing, ended up coming back into programming. Anybody else disappointed that Zimmergen was not brewing related? Yeah. All right. Okay. At least a couple of people saw that. And I actually want to kind of mirror a lot of things that Athen had said about the ubiquity of, or the prevalence of JavaScript and the availability. And my start in JavaScript was really because you had that instantaneous UI, you had that instantaneous distribution capability. The fact that as soon as you start writing JavaScript, you had a UI right there. Before console log, you would, document.write. So you had a user interface instantly. So in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, JavaScript had already been my UI of choice. I live and I work in Oakland. I work for the Chabot Space and Science Center. It's an observatory in the Oakland Hills. You can see just right up there on the edge. And I'm an exhibits fabricator or general fabricator for the museum. So a big part of my job is working with various teams to bring the projects that they are working on to life, to actually fabricate the physical enclosures or parts that they need to make them happen. I've been with Chabot. I started volunteering with Chabot about a little over a year and a half ago, working with student engineering groups that were doing exchange program with high school students in India, and then started working actually at the museum doing fabrication last November. Really great place to work. It provides me with a lot of interesting opportunities in doing different things. As my bio said in the Meetup description, my job is best described as a carpenter with a soldering iron. A lot of my day-to-day work is just woodworking, fabricating out things. But then I have this amazing cross-section of stuff that I do in between, from soldering electronics kits to making demonstrations, and a lot of different stuff in between. So one of the biggest project that I've worked on since I started there was this stop-motion animation. I was brought in on a bunch of meetings with different departments talking about how we were going to make this happen. So the first meeting, the manager that was facilitating this project, he's done some research. He's trying to come up with ideas on how can we make an accessible stop-motion animation booth for visitors that the youngest kids can use with the minimal interface. We're talking buttons only. There's no keyboard, there's no mouse, there's nothing like that. So we had to come up with the minimal interface. So this manager, meaning well, has done some research, and he's talking about Windows macros, and we're going to use some other software, and we're going to program button clicks here and there. And I'm a console junkie, and so I'm just cringing already. I'm thinking, so conversation progresses a little bit, and he's like, well, we need to take in encoding into consideration. Okay, this is my in. Okay, FFmpeg is great. It can encode. I've used it before. I think this will work out. We could do a bash script if we really, really wanted to do this. I already knew what I was making in my head. I just needed the sales path to get this done. So I asked him, can I get 2 or 3 hours research? I have an idea of how we can do this. It'll allow more flexibility. It'll allow us to customize rather than, doing this macro clicking and having a UI that we may or may not have any real control over. So I already knew Electron was going to be my go-to. Athens mentioned this as well. It's a great system for building desktop applications. Has anyone done any Electron development? A couple people. Does anyone not know what Electron is? So Electron.js is kind of a mash between Blink rendering engine from Chrome and Node. So it's as if you were making a web application, but you can make any call that you would in Node, but you can do it directly from the browser page. Whether this is a good idea or not, they have a specific model that I didn't quite follow, but for the speed of getting something started, it can't be beat because it allows so much access to so many features that you otherwise wouldn't. And then the fact that it's just a browser on top of it, it gives you all of the access to the web APIs that are generally very quick and easy to use. So just to give a quick idea of what kind of stuff is made with Electron, digital image organizing, Office for Google Drive, the Beaker browser is in here somewhere. Anyone tried Beaker browser yet? Very neat browser that will allow direct URL access to distributed content. So you can hit IPFS URLs and you can hit DApp project URLs. So it understands those protocols as they understand HTTP, which means from your browser you can actually fork a website, make content changes, and it's automatically syndicated. For anybody interested in any sort of distributed file system work, really recommend checking out Beaker browser. There's a couple other, Scuttlebutt has been getting a lot of publicity recently with the Scuttlebutt, I think is the protocol. Patchwork, yeah, there you go. And then Patchwork is a distributed chat application, also written on top of Electron. So it's a pretty obvious choice for me. So like I said, I asked for about 2 or 3 hours to sort of like see what sort of proof of concept I could come up with. About 45 minutes later, people are like gathering around my desk because I have a stop-motion animation built. I have a little webcam hanging above my desk. I'm pressing C, I'm pressing P to replay, and this is happening. And everyone was thrilled. I was rather new at the company at the time, and I don't think a lot of people really knew what my role there was. They just said, I'm going to come on and make things. So this was a real departure from what they had previously seen, where frequently something like this would have cost a museum thousands and thousands of dollars to outsource to a dedicated fabrication company. And they're going to like provide a box that they only can support. You can't do anything on it. So the executive director finally comes by and he's checking it out. And the first thing that he notices is that I have Chrome DevTools open. He stops and he says, "You did this in web technology?" Yeah. And so that was like the thumbs up of approval from the executive director. And the simplicity and like getting into it. And like I said, in 45 minutes, I had a functioning proof of concept. And this amounts to basically the entirety of the UI. I used 0 templating in the entire thing. Almost everything is as simple as showing and hiding elements to show the different states of the application. I actually think the content of only, actually it's right there, the YT code, that's actually the only thing that changes in the entire UI besides just simply showing or hiding things. Then the meat of the application is those 2 video tags at the top. Those like really make the application happen. And just the fact that it was so easy, like so effortlessly setting up the camera feed to really have essentially 2 lines of code, and I've got the webcam working. Get user media pops up the permission dialog that you've probably seen before that just asks, do you want to allow the user to use the webcam? Do you want him to use the microphone? Typically the one you see is, do you want to let the website see your location? But this is dead simple. And then it provides a stream, which is not really like a node stream. But the video element from there is just piping the webcam to this frame. And so that's about as simple as you can get set up for doing this sort of application. So the next big thing to solve in this is getting the actual frames out. So now I've got a basic structure of, this is the application, this is sort of what it looks like. the user interface is dead simple. It's just showing the stream. And the third element, the image element there, in animation, it's called an onion skin, and it's the previous frame, but with 50% opacity. So you can use this to line up your motions. So then, sadly, in the state of things right now, there is a little bit of, there's kind of hoops to jump through to grab individual frames from a video element. I think there's talk about giving a proper way to do that, where you can actually grab a data buffer straight out. But right now, you have to jump through a couple little hoops. So basically, this code, the top if statement there just creates a new canvas element if it doesn't exist already, because we need this canvas element to actually grab data, to actually grab a frame. So just after the block, the draw image. So what we're doing is we're actually taking the video element, whatever content is currently in it, gets copied to this canvas. And then there's a bunch of different tricks from there on how you can convert each of those. But it involves you get a data buffer out, and it's like a uint8 array of RBGA values, and then you convert those. Like there's a C to B. Yes, I do C programming as well. There's like canvas to blob, and then the FS write file. And so right there, that line, that's the one that like was the proving case for using Electron for me. This is the one where this is in the render process. When I mentioned earlier that there's a bit of a separation that I didn't quite adhere to, there is a main process that runs, and that's strictly a Node.js app. There's a little bit of decorations based on the Electron module that you can include, but then the primary UI is spit off into a rendering process as well. And so right there, it's starting to look a lot like a traditional web app or a Node web application, where you've got a Node server and you've got a UI and you're doing WebSockets or WebRTC or something like that. And that was definitely my initial thought when thinking about this project. Just habit and years of doing that, that would be kind of the first reaction. But then there's still considerations to worry about. There's I've got to do error checking on all the WebRTC to just make sure it's up all the time, even though it's running on the same box, and having to make sure all the firewall rules are set correct, so nobody's monkeying around with it externally. So this, and one of the best ways I could sort of describe working with Electron.js, it's like doing web apps without WebSockets, because the IPC that allows you to talk between the main process and the rendering process is reliable. It behaves just like callback driven. It behaves just like most messaging buses you're used to, but it's happening in a very reliable manner. Hopefully very reliable. We've not noticed any issues with it so far. And it just really cuts down on the amount of work that you have to do to get these two processes to talk to one another. And then also at the same time, I could have done everything in the single process, but it makes sense. There are definitely cases where it makes sense to break the two of them up. I'll go over a couple of those. But in this case, because all of the image processing has happened on the front end already, there's no reason to not just write the file directly rather than sending the data to the back end and having it written there. So just to get it to happen as quickly as possible, this style makes sense. And then it's the same thing with the encoding process. So what we were doing with that last frame is we're just taking one shot at a time. We're grabbing a frame from the video element, we're saving it to a file, and we're just marking it as part of this session. Then we get to the point where the user wants to play back their video. Again, calling from the front end, this is definitely one I would move to the main process and just send a signal over the IPC, just telling it, re-encode the video. I would actually, the goal there is to actually have it start proactively encoding the video, because it can take a while. But this is the same thing. It's the rendering process. This is the UI, and it's actually calling the command line FFmpeg and telling it where these images are and giving it settings and saying, okay, compile this MP4 and let me know when it's done. And then when it's done, we'll go back. So the second video element is just a playback element. They're just layered on top of one another. And so when it's done, all we do is set the source on that. There's an event that fires when it's done with playback. It gets hidden again. The last frame gets reshown, and the current input gets reshown. So really, for something that's quite complex, the code for this is still really, really quite simple. Yeah, that's kicking that off. And then one of the other features, and this was another part of the meeting, and this is like one of the winning points that I got on using the web technology, is that they hadn't really fully thought out how we were going to distribute these videos. Because that's the idea. This is visitors to the museum. They're coming in. They're doing this unassisted most of the time. If it's just a regular hours in the day, they're doing it on their own. So there was talk about like, we're just going to upload them to a Google Drive. But there wasn't really much of a conversation after that. It was like, well, you know, if we do this Node-based or even JavaScript-based, well, then we've got YouTube APIs. And so now all of a sudden, we can just directly load these up to YouTube. And there was a little bit of hemming and hawing at first. And then I said, we upload them unlisted, so they don't show up in our channel. And it's probably just a little bit cut off from here. But after a video has been saved, the whole machine basically goes into a reset state. And they're greeted with a screen that says your video is available at this URL and a big old QR code. And that's something that we wouldn't have been able to do using somebody else's software. And yeah, just like using these macros. We wouldn't have had control over a UI. We would have lost this sort of flexibility, or we would have just been constantly jumping through hoops trying to get something like this to actually work. Let's see, where are we? So this is actually what I built. It's not your typical stop animation. A lot of times people will see something like this, and it's usually like a desktop. It's really popular to do with tablets these days. So they just do like a little podium. The stage for this one is about 16 by 20 feet, and the camera's mounted in the ceiling. It was specifically designed to not be very operable by one person. So you can see the button board. That is the only user interface. The idea was it was really specifically designed for group use. So the idea is you have a director, and then you have a stage. When we have school field trips, there'll usually be a box of props and stuff like that. But that's a really big thing. It's like our weekly visitors are almost all school groups. And a big part about what we do, we utilize a lot of grant money to bring school groups up to Chabot that normally wouldn't be able to afford it. We got a great grant from Google earlier in this year that we're bringing a lot of the schools from East Oakland that normally wouldn't be able to afford it. It's insane this day and age that schools literally can't afford buses. So it's really cool that we have this opportunity to provide that. And so this is what this exhibit was built for, is when that all got started. So we made it as big as we could because we wanted to be able to fit entire school groups, and then we always appoint the teacher as the director. Something that's worked out really well. Especially sometimes teachers aren't quite as proactive as we'd like them to be. So then here you go, ultra minimum interface, if ever there was one. I'll just sort of go over this part quickly. Arduino button interface, I used a TNC initially on them. And all it does is just spits out information to the serial port, button state information. The first time, it just sent out a 0 through 4. It didn't matter if the button was going. It didn't do anything for up. It was only down. And then we realized we needed a reset really badly. So then I had to rework the firmware so it could actually detect up and down. And the secret is if it's locked up, you hold the delete last. Hold that down, and it will reset the whole machine. Couple of interesting things is like we had to do a lot of things. The title of my talk also, if you hadn't seen, was Big Shiny Button Must Hit. I'll be in my workshop, which is the other side of the room through a roll-up door and at the back of a loading dock, and I can hear kids smacking these buttons. And it's like, So then I wait for it to get quiet, and I go back out and I check the machine. Another thing, something that doesn't quite show is that these buttons have about a 3/4 inch lip on them. And the machines broke the first day, and they broke the second day, and they broke the third day. every time I went and I crawled under the machine and all the wires are twisted together. The first day, all of the wiring was ripped apart. Flummoxed. And it happened 3 days in a row, and then it was like the last day. And then one day I come into work, and one of the buttons is on my desk. And a guy from the front desk tells me, it's like, yeah, I saw a kid walking out with it. I was like, oh, okay. It was the save button, ironically. So it was like, he was really saving it. And then that's when I realized, it's like the kids were actually grabbing the buttons and they were twisting them. And they were twisting them and they were twisting them. It was ripping all the wiring apart. Most of the time, the lock nut just started free spinning, so they couldn't take it out. The one time they did. Kids are really destructive, it turns out. The next iteration on this, I will sink the buttons down, so only the dome piece protrudes above the wood. Hilarious bits there. Just a bit about the inner workings, so you can actually see the button board there. They all run Ubuntu. Really basic, just using sysd and a somewhat custom start script that makes sure it's always running. I had some crashing problems, Electron crashing during development, but it doesn't seem to have persisted. I could have to do with just having DevTools open all the time, refreshing all the time, not quite sure what was doing it. The other thing though, so then next time somebody's telling you how full stack of a developer they are, ask them if they used a reciprocating saw on their project. So a big part of this is like, I actually had the reciprocating saws right there. So we had to modify, these were saved from an old exhibit, so we're modifying things as we go. We are a nonprofit, but we work on really tight budgets, so we reuse anything that we can. These came out of an old exhibit. I got to do a little bit of hacking apart to get them into there. Come back to that slide. Okay, talked about the Arduino a little bit. It's pretty robust. I tried to make it should work on any Arduino compatible. I use the Teensies. I use those because they have interrupts on almost all their pins, so you can get faster detection and it's less error prone. But it now uses interrupts and polling. It has like a kind of a correction using polling, and it means it'll work on any Arduino. And there's a very good reason for that, which I'll show in a minute. Then another big part about it is using UDEV serial. This is a module that I had been working on already, and then it was a good fit for this project. So basically UDEV serial, it has the same interface as node serial. Yeah, totally. So basically what this does is it's node. Has anyone used node-serialport? Everyone should use node-serialport, because if you're using node-serialport, you're doing something really fun. That is a fact. Dispute me. So node-serialport, as its name implies, allows you to talk to serial devices. Big in the NodeBots community, Johnny 5, it's huge. Basically, Johnny 5 uses node-serialport to talk to Arduino Firmata processors. So it would be nothing without node-serialport. So what I did is I ended up taking node-serialport and combining it with UDEV. And so the interface it attempts to maintain is the same as node-serialport, with the exception of the first argument is usually a string pointing to a serial device that you want to use, /dev/tty something, usually. And there's a huge problem with that, is that whenever you unplug a device, if something was reading it, when it got unplugged, if you plug that device back in and that the process has not let go, it will increment the number. And so whatever string you had in there previously doesn't exist anymore. It just went from 0, now it's 1, now it's something else. So instead, the first parameter is just key value matching against UDEV descriptors. So every time you plug in a device in Linux, this is very Linux specific, whenever you plug in a device, UDEV broadcasts the information about. You have UDEV rules that allow it to do a bunch of different things. And there's descriptions of the hardware, what it does, what capabilities it has, and most importantly, for a serial device, it says what port it's on. It says where it exists. So what this will do is you can you can instantiate one of these at any given point. The hardware device doesn't even need to be plugged into your computer at the time. And as soon as you plug that device in, though, the open event will fire. And that's normally an event that would have fired after you instantiated with just node-serialport. Then the other place where it diverges from node-serialport is that it can emit all of these events more than once. So if you unplug a device, it will give you a close and a disconnect event. And if you plug it back in, you're going to get another open event. But that's huge for getting around this problem of the device locking, where these names end up changing. And if you have it in a configuration file or anything like that, there's nothing. You're going to get an error. Node-serialport's going to say, sorry, there's just no device there. Go home. Then everything else about it is basically the same. And then it also has a CLI tool that comes with it, which these days have been using exclusively for doing any sort of UDEV device querying. It'll dump JSON blobs of your entire UDEV system. I actually use it on the command line a ton for just when I'm working with hardware. You can actually do backticks in a command line, and it will hold the process until your device is present. And then as soon as the device becomes present, it will drop that string back to whatever outer command you're run. This is huge for doing hardware development, where your serial device disappears as soon as you start flashing. But it's going to reappear, but you don't reliably know what it's going to be. And so basically it allows me to run my terminal in a loop. So every time I start flashing my device, my terminal crashes because something else has just kicked it out. Something has put a reset on the hardware line, but as soon as the flash process is done, the terminal will automatically reopen itself. I'm also doing experiments with automated Arduino flashing, just like the TNC does. Yeah, the other hardware. So the reason I ended up doing interrupts and polling is because 120 volts AC. Making a mistake in Node can cause you some problems, but making a mistake in hardware can literally blow devices up. So there's another Electron I want to talk about, and it's the Electron in the carpet. And this is, I've been tinkering on hardware for a decade and a half, but a lot of things don't leave my workbench that frequently. So things work on your workbench, everything's all good and gravy, and then you suddenly put your machine out in a giant carpeted hall, and somebody complains and says it keeps saving on its own. So checking through all the logs, and I don't see anything weird. I just see the save button getting hit. Said, well, what button were you hitting? We weren't hitting any button. Took about 3 days to figure it out. And then the final debug step, and this is actually my all-time favorite debug step I ever did. I shuffled my feet across the carpet, and I touched the machine, and the save screen started coming up. And this is the big difference between hardware refactoring and software refactoring. It's like you could put off software refactoring for a really long time, and there was something I knew I needed to do. And I needed to come back. Let me bring this. I have evidence now. I just noticed it. All of those wires right there are antennas. So having those long wires inside the case, there was enough electrons that when I would touch the case and they had nowhere to go, they went to the save button, which had the longest wire. It was about 3/4 of an inch longer than all the rest of the wires. So fun with hardware, a little extra excursion. Stopmotion, I think. How long do I have? Couple other little bits I wanted to talk about. Also just yell questions at me anytime you want. That's actually most of what I have, I guess. So summary of it is that Electron is a really awesome tool for really rapidly developing desktop applications in a familiar style, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. And I see it as a way of giving even more control for anytime you're doing anything that's localized, anytime I'm doing any sort of specialized tooling now. Huge part of my career was building tools. I worked for a lot of different size companies, but almost 3/4 of my career was internal tooling. And it was all intranet stuff. And ever in the future, I would consider using Electron for some of that, just because the ease of development, it just knocks out a couple of these persistent headaches. And then it allows you to really combine different technologies in a really cool new way. And with upcoming changes with how with how native bindings are going to be working. Is that right? We're gonna have some cool stuff in the future with bindings. The little bit I've been keeping track on that is going to hopefully ease the pain of some of getting the bindings, native bindings working. I lucked out, so this application has 2 native bindings in it, and they both work, because UDEV and node-serial are both native bindings. So this is just part of my deploy script that you do your install, and then you do your Electron rebuild. A lot of the stuff works. A lot of that stuff has gotten a lot easier. If anyone ever used like NW.js, what was that? NW.js, that I believe was a hurdle that they never quite overcame, and sort of was, prevented that project from carrying on. So it's really cool to see the progress that's been made with Electron. Go check out that list. It's broke now. The list on the Electron site of all of the different applications is really, really, really impressive. There is just a ton of stuff being built all the time, and there's more to be coming all the time.
What's the demo? Where's the...
We're gonna do it on my laptop. This is the demo. This is my pride and joy. This is my best stop motion I made. There's a couple other in here. This the great part is, just seeing like when families actually get out there and start using it. It's really cool. There was usage concerns about a lot of them. I didn't have a chance to like really curate. And that was one of the biggest concerns of this project was, how are we going to distribute these back? How are we going to allow the visitors to access these without compromising their privacy? How do we put these out in an accessible way? So luckily, well, not luckily, I got to say one of the hardest parts of this project was the YouTube API. It's a nightmare. Their documentation, if there's ever an example of over documentation, it's all of the Google APIs. They are so confusing because there is so much stuff that says nothing. I don't know why that one didn't loop. See, this is mine. This one's great. It's like a Japanese policeman's helmet. It's really cool. I was trying to set up a webcam too, and like we're gonna do them, but it was a busy week. Sources available. Come visit me at Chabot Space and Science Center. It's a very cool place. It's an Oakland staple for like 200 years. It actually used to be downtown Oakland next to the police station. That was the original, that was the first Chabot Observatory. It's a really cool place. If you haven't been there, we do First Fridays, which is tomorrow. Cool time to come out. We open the bar, have some drinks. It's kid friendly.
The kids love the bar.
Well, it goes. I might be bartending, so I could use a hand. No, but some people shy away as soon as you say like we open the bars, and like, oh no, kids are still welcome. It's a great place. It's been around forever. Local institution. We're a nonprofit. We could always use the support. Any questions?
First, big fan. My kids love the museum.
Awesome.
Has bringing in Electron and kind of opening people's eyes to open source and web technologies brought on a new renaissance to how the museum as a whole is approaching a lot of the technology-based?
So I'm not pushing too hard. I'm really taking this process slow. anyone who's familiar with the history, like Chabot has a bit of a history. There was really bad stagnation on the board for years. So this is a big departure. There's a new executive director that came in 2 years ago to really like change the way things were done. And this is why my position was created in the first place. There was never an on-site fabricator before. There was my first weeks in this place were cleaning a neglected workshop. So luckily, open sourcing was not too big of a fight. We're still in talk about how exactly we're going to license. Right now, it's non-commercial. It's Creative Commons, BYNCSA, and that just has to do with the way that museums license technology to one another. I personally would like to give it a more liberal open license and monetize in other ways. But that reaction that I described of, oh, you did this in web technology, that was a big turning point. So I'm slowly trying to bring on various things that will allow us to embrace open source more, bringing internal version control. There hasn't been any previously. There's fragmented departments. Like everyone uses technology in one way or another in all the different departments, but it's very fragmented. So trying to bring those things under version control, really, I think that's a good starting point because it really allows people to start sharing resources. Hopefully that answers. Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned something or alluded to the idea that native bindings were going to get easier. I would love to hear more.
Go read about it somewhere else.
That is, give me a little something to Google for you.
N-API.
N-API. Yeah. API.
Is an ABI stable API for Node, yes.
All right, so I'm Googling for the API for the ABI.
Yes.
That just happened.
Correct. All right. I'm still using NAND, so I don't know. Yeah.
There's an animation, newly popular animation system software, greensock.js,
Okay.
that Google presenters at SFNode Meetup thought were great.
Oh, cool.
They presented. I haven't had a chance to work with them much. Have you tried anything?
I've not even heard of it. So it didn't come up in my initial search in February. We started this project back in February.
On Deutsch.
Sorry?
It's German.
Oh, okay.
Green.
Ich will gefinde. Any other questions? Yeah.
What about the camera? Like, I
Oh.
didn't mention anything about the camera.
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't get to that part. So we basically have like HD camcorders hung from the ceiling down to an HDMI USB 3 capture box, and then video for Linux just takes care of everything. It shows up as a webcam. So there's like there was zero configuration, which that was one of the early like unknowns of this project, and it didn't matter what direction we took from a software level. We knew we were going to be doing it at this scale, so we needed an HD external camera. So that knocked out all of the iPad software suites immediately because you can't interface with an external camera with those. So yeah, we just used some really basic HDMI capture boxes. Yeah.
My daughter loves these stop-motion stuffs, and they're similar but much smaller scale ones, like Lawrence Hall of Science and the Oakland Museum of California. Do you know anything about how they work? I presume they're not doing an Electron now.
I seriously doubt that. No, I don't. I'm familiar with the Oakland one, and during our research of this, we meant to get up to Lawrence Hall, but just during our research of this, we meant to get up to the Lawrence Hall of Science to see theirs. And really try to talk to somebody about what they did, but no, I have no direct information on how they did any of theirs.
One more. Anybody?
Yep.
Did Captain Morgan ever ask for their handle back?
They tried to. When Twitter first got popular, they apparently didn't know how it worked, and they offered me a decent amount of money for it. And I told him to kick rocks. All right, thank you very much.